Welcome to the Man Rules Podcast. If you're looking to live with more intention, build connection, and live a more authentic, meaningful life, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dan Griffin. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that they keep changing the rules for us men without telling us. So each week, I just throw out the rule book and cover the tough topics about the real issues that men face. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what kind of man you're supposed to be. I'm here to help you make your own rules and become the kind of man you want to be. So let's jump in. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Man Rules Podcast. And I have an old, familiar voice. Well, maybe I shouldn't say old. I have a youngish, familiar voice to the Man Rules Podcast, Rick Belden, who is going to be having a very powerful and uncommon conversation where we are going to take on the ultimate topic, and that is the one of life and death, of mortality as men. And so, Rick, always nice to have you on the Man Rules Podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Dan. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a little while.
It has been a while. It's been too long, actually. So we'll have to remedy that by having you on again for another great topic. But this one, let's stay focused on, because I know from your own personal experience, this has a real relevance for you, and it's really resonating for you. But I think for human beings in general, this is a big topic when we talk about mortality. So can you start by just saying, when you talk about men and mortality, what exactly do you mean?
Well, as is typically the case when I talk about male experience and masculinity in men, I'm rooted in my own experience first and foremost, as well as whatever reading and research and observation I've done. So in my case, I have gone through some physical changes in the last 2.5 years that have been pretty significant. And the mortality experience for me has come in phases. I originally encountered it in a real way for the first time when I was 47, about 15 years ago, not quite. I had a ruptured appendix and almost died. It took me a month to get back on my feet and longer than that to start to feel like I did before it happened. And I never did really get all the way back.
Wow.
To the way I thought I was. And that was the first time in my life that I had the physical, cellular, complete psychological experience of that death was a real thing. It wasn't something that just happened to other people. And it had a significant impact on me over the next few years. And we can talk about that as we get into the conversation. And as I said, I've had several other experiences in the last 2.5 years that have brought that point home in a different kind of way. The ruptured appendix was the experience of really understanding that I can go anytime.
Yeah.
The last 2.5 years has been more along the lines of you can get some rude surprises medically that you never expected, that you didn't deserve, in quotes, because you took care of yourself, and you have to deal with them. And nobody really knows what those things might be.
Yeah. You can't see them coming necessarily, and they get here, and it's kind of like, what did I do to deserve this? I mean,
absolutely. I went through that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's hard for people not to go to some degree of self-pity or feeling like a victim to the great, perpetrator in the sky, or to, somebody who's out to get them, as opposed to this is something that has happened and that's it.
Well, I would say from my own experience that at least part of what drives that is not just a desire to be a victim, but a need to try to frame and build a narrative around what's happening to you in some way that makes sense. Because what happened to me made no sense at all. And it was difficult because, a lot of this is going to depend on your makeup and how you're put together and how your mind works. But in my case, I have always prided myself on being self-reliant. And so a lot of the process I went through initially, and we don't have to be mysterious about this, we'll get to what happened. But I'll just say that my self-reliant attitude worked against me initially, because I felt like if this happened to me, I must have done something to cause it. I must have failed somehow.
Mm.
I had to get out of that mindset pretty quickly because that's a pit of quicksand that you don't want to fall into.
Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly didn't mean to be insensitive talking about the victim component or the why me. I know from my own past experiences, though, where life seemed to be unfair, it was kind of, and I get that that's part of it, is you're trying to make sense of it, and you're trying to make sense of it from a very personal perspective. And so of course it's going to come back to, but why me?
Yeah, and I didn't think what you said was insensitive at all.
Okay.
I guess I developed a little deeper understanding of what might be driving that process.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
someone is delivered some shocking medical news that seems just blatantly unfair and doesn't seem justified by the way that you thought you were taking care of yourself all these years.
So please let our audience know what is this that you're talking about, this significant life experience that you've now got that you have to deal with that you're referring to?
Well, I was diagnosed with severe osteoporosis in the fall of 2016. And the genesis of this thing was that I did something stupid that I know better than to do. I'm 61 now. I guess I was 58 at the time. And my next door neighbor asked me if I could help him move a couch into his place that he bought somewhere. And I said, "Is that heavy?" And he said, "No, it's not heavy at all." Oh, the thing weighed a ton. And I'm not very big. I'm kind of wiry, and I actually broke a blood vessel in one of my forearms because I was propping this thing up, trying to hold it. And so it was pretty heavy. And a couple days later, I got out of bed, and my low back did not feel good at all. And to shorten it up a bit, I had a broken back for 3 months, and I didn't know it.
Oh my goodness.
And when I finally had some x-rays, the technician that took the x-rays, I could barely stand up straight. I was walking around with a couple of sticks I got from Home Depot at that point. Tremendous amount of pain. I had to stop working. And when the x-ray tech looked at the pictures that she took, she said, "Have you been in a car wreck?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Did you fall off a ladder?" And I'm like, what is she talking about? It turned out that I had 5 fractured vertebrae.
Damn.
And so I had a CT scan. I went to a spinal surgeon, and he looked at it and he said, "Well, Mr. Belden, I'm sorry to tell you, but you've got severe osteoporosis." And I said, "What are you talking about?"
Wow.
What are you talking about? That's not even a man's disease.
Yeah.
You know? That's part of this conversation. That's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation, Dan, because I want to help people be a little bit more aware that yes, men actually get this. It's the majority of men who contract osteoporosis don't actually encounter it until I think in their early 70s. But there's a significant population of men who get it. There's a doctor who's helped me up in Massachusetts who was diagnosed when he was 45. So I think that going forward, I think we're going to see that we're going to start to see some momentum toward, hey guys, after you turn 50, you really ought to get a bone density test. Because I'd never had one. And after I was diagnosed, it was such a shock, just incredible. I never imagined that I'd have anything like that. And after I was diagnosed, I did some research, of course, and I looked at the guidelines. Here's what you do to prevent this, and here's what you shouldn't do if you don't want to get it. And I did all the things that you're supposed to do, and all the things that things you're not supposed to do. I stopped doing those things if I did any of them when I was 30 years old. So
can you explain what is osteoporosis for those people who aren't familiar with the disease?
Yes, it's a loss of bone density.
Yeah.
So if you think about the structure of your bone, you have to. Bone is not solid. Of course, bone is organic. It's living tissue. But you have to have the proper density so that the structure, for example, of my spine can support my weight. And when you have osteoporosis, you can think of it as the bone being more porous than it's supposed to be. So in other words, you've got all these little pockets in your vertebrae that should be filled with bone, but they're not. And so what you've got is a structure that is inadequate to hold you upright, and it will do the best it can for as long as it can. But when you do something crazy like I did, trying to help that guy move that couch, I already had the disease. I didn't know it. And I basically put so much stress on my spine that I started to fracture vertebrae. And once I fractured a couple of them, then the weight gets redistributed in a crazy way, and then other fractures start. So basically, again, osteoporosis is a abnormally low bone density, which means that your what should be solid in a sense is actually porous, and it can't support weight in the way that it should.
And so would it be fair to say that the bones become quite brittle, and so they're very, very sensitive to any type of activity or any type of interaction with the outside world, that you either scrape against them, you hit against them, or you exert any pressure that requires, just like you did, a certain degree of strength and pressure.
Yes, and also you can do things like sometimes just bending or twisting is enough to fracture a vertebrae if you're in bad enough shape. You can fracture just from coughing or sneezing. It's not just extraordinary activity or activity that's kind of outside the range of what might be safe. It could be almost anything.
Wow.
If your bone density is low enough. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
So as I said, I was suffering for 3 months. I had a broken back and multiple fractured vertebrae. I didn't know it. Had the x-rays, got the diagnosis. Fortunately, there's a new technique that can be used called the kyphoplasty, which it's a way of reshaping and resizing and filling in those vertebrae with something called bone cement. And so I had to have 2 of those because I had 6 repaired in September of 16 and then 4 repaired in January of 17. And that was very successful, thankfully. And I'm also doing a couple different things medication-wise. One of the things they found was my testosterone was very, very low. And low testosterone in men can be a contributor to osteoporosis. So that's another thing to be aware of. And so I'm being treated for that and also taking a medication to help my bone recycling process work in a healthy way. In normal bone, you cycle old bone out and you grow new bone to replace it. And so I'm taking a medication now that is supposed to encourage new bone growth while allowing the old bone to cycle out, because the old bone is like dry bark on a tree. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
So that is, and I'm doing physical therapy. I've been doing physical therapy for 2 years now.
Wow.
And I've done very well, and I feel very grateful for the progress that I've made. But it changed my life forever because I always tell people the ruptured appendix was great because you only have one. They take it out, and that's never going to happen again.
Yeah, right.
But what I have now is an underlying degenerative disease, and I don't know what the future holds for me. And so that has obviously, I've had to make some adjustments attitudinally and psychologically to that. And it's something that I have to work with every day because it would be very easy to be freaked out all the time and be afraid to do it.
God, I can imagine, right? Because you're walking around and you're like, what activity is going to be the thing that sets this off? What activity is, exercise or any kind of physical exertion, I can imagine, can be quite scary because you don't know how your body's going to respond to it.
And that's been a lot of the work in physical therapy, not just the physical stuff, the mechanical stuff and so forth that I'm learning and working on, but the psychological part, because initially your body tries to protect itself. And so all the muscles had kicked in to try to protect those areas that were hurting and keep me upright and all those kind of things. So I've had to unravel a lot of that, but I'm very fortunate because I have a great physical therapist and she understands the psychological and the mental part of it very well. And so I'm able to share with her what I'm feeling, what's coming up for me. If we're trying to do something, I can tell her, hey, that's scary. And so I've been very fortunate in that way. The other thing that I shouldn't neglect to mention is that people with the condition I have falls are very dangerous.
Yeah. Oh God, I can imagine.
Yeah. A little stumble, a little fall that somebody else would just get right up. It could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
That's another thing that has to be kept in mind and it has to be managed. And at the same time, I just made a decision. I'm not going to just sit in a chair or lay in the bed. I still have a life and I'm going to do what I can.
So is this condition something that can be contained in the sense that it can't get better, but you can do something to prevent it from getting worse or getting worse as quickly as it had been? Or is it something where they think they can actually improve it? I mean, it's essentially here to stay. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the likelihood of being able to improve it or not eliminate it, but make improvements to the extent that it's not such a big issue, that all depends upon the patient or the person. There are different causes for this. And so depending upon the cause, depending upon your age, your general state of health, all of that stuff plays into it. Some medications appear to be effective for some people and not effective for others. So I think my conclusion based on my own experience and the research I've done is that the outlook it just varies a lot from individual to individual.
So I can imagine. So, as men, we're really raised to be powerful, to be active, to be a lot of things that are basically not as possible, or certainly are impacted by something as serious as this. And so your deep experience as a man has become, you have been forced to truly step back and explore and deeply meditate upon what it means for you to be a man and what kind of man you are. Is that fair from the comments that I've heard you make?
Yeah, I think so. That's why when I pitched this topic to you, I pitched it with the title Men, Masculinity, and Mortality.
Yeah.
Because I feel like since this started for me 2.5 years ago, a little bit more than that now, those three things have been at play with one another, and I've been trying to sort that out. Because for one thing, as I said, this is considered to be a woman's disease.
Yeah, right. Like breast cancer.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very hard to even find information that's tailored to men.
Wow.
When it comes to this disease. So anytime I think there's always the possibility that when you wind up on the other side of the room on the woman's side, for whatever reason, there is some feeling of like, well, am I somehow defective as a man because I have a disease that's supposedly only happened to women?
Yeah.
And then there's the whole issue of, like I'm single. I live by myself. Like a lot of men, my support network is a little thin. And so I was thrown into a situation where I reached a point where I couldn't even drive. So I had to decide and figure out and strategize, how am I going to get to doctor's appointments back and forth because I can't drive myself now. How am I going to get to the hospital for this procedure at 5:30 in the morning? Who am I going to hand my cell phone to before I go into surgery that can give it back to me when I come out?
So God gave you the gift, life, God, whatever you want to call it, gave you the gift of a deep surrender to asking for help.
Yes. And as you know, Dan, one of the unfortunate aspects of that is that asking doesn't guarantee that someone's going to do it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And when I did my first surgery, it just so happened that everybody I knew was busy or out of town that weekend. And I think it was the 12th person that I asked.
Wow.
That said, yeah, I can take you in at 5:30 and come by at 3 and give you your phone.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And so, yeah, it's a humbling experience. And
I can imagine. I truly, I can't imagine actually, because I'm not there.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the point of this conversation is it's always there. It's always looming, in the background, our mortality. And yet it's so easy to take for granted the fact that we're here. I had a guest, I just can't forget this because one, he was just such a wonderful guest, and I had him on twice, by the name of Tim Clausen, and he was talking about his relationship with his son, and this is on a podcast. He's talking about his relationship with his son. He and I are talking, and I'm talking about how, God forbid something should happen to you where you find out you only have a couple of months to live or something. And similar to what had happened with his father when his father had a stroke, I said, what about your relationship with your son? Will you be able to heal it? And sure as shit, like a week after that podcast or 2 weeks after that podcast, he got diagnosed with terminal cancer.
That's unbelievable.
And he was dead within 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that this is a guy who that was not supposed to happen to.
Yes.
And the way that it happened so quickly. It really, I mean, I lost a good friend in September, and he died. He tragically drowned on the beach on Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's one of those things where it's just like, what? But the truth is, I could pretend like all of those experiences I've had, I mean, it woke me up briefly from the perspective of like, damn, I know he did not go to the beach expecting to die. That just didn't happen. But at the same time, it hasn't hit me to the core of truly impressing upon me the fact that my mortality is really tenuous, and all of our mortality is much more tenuous than we think.
It absolutely is. And your story reminds me of something else I mentioned in the email I sent you about doing this topic. New Year's Day, I was looking at my mailing list and I saw one of the email address. I'm looking at the email addresses that bounced. And there's a fellow named Eric Denner here in Austin. He's a counselor. And he was someone I'd known for quite a while. And I thought, well, his email address is no longer valid. I'll just look him up and see if I can find a contact information for him. And what I found instead was his obituary. And
oh my God.
Yeah, he passed away when he was 67. I think he'd been gone for a little over a year, and I didn't know it. And it was shocking for me because he was there were 3 people that helped me get started back in this work back in 2007. As you know, Dan, as other people know, I wrote my first book back in 1990, and it didn't really do anything, and I got real discouraged and just stopped trying to do this kind of work for 17 years. And Eric was one of the people that showed me and encouraged me and supported me and enthusiastically helped me resurrect my work. So he's an important person to me.
Yeah.
And we had exchanged emails about a month or 2 before he passed away. And he'd been having some back problems. He'd been having some surgeries. And he said, yeah, I'd really like to get together. And I said, yeah, I would too. Yeah. And didn't hear anything. And the next thing I see is his obituary. So this isn't just about, I mean, I'm talking about myself and my own experience, but in terms of that sudden mortality, that shocking discovery about someone that you thought was vital and had a long lifeline is part of this too. Because our own mortality, it begins to intrude at the same time other people's mortality begins to intrude along with it.
The truth is, right, very few people by the time they're adults haven't had some experience that has woken them up briefly to their mortality. But how are you dealing with this from that perspective? I mean, I can imagine that if I had a disease like osteoporosis and that was basically changing so much of how I lived my life while at the same time me not wanting to let it change too much of it, there is this sense that the candle is burning out. And I know the candle is burning out more than I've ever known that before. Is that part of it? Or what are you learning about your mortality through this process?
It's a big part of it. And I'll just tell you a couple stories from my experience about that. And I'm going to tell the one that happened second before the first one, because the first one is a little bit longer. But when the spinal surgeon showed me the pictures and told me you have severe osteoporosis and you've got fractured vertebrae 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Of course, I was shocked. But at the same time, I said, I guess some of this is being naive, but I think it served me. My next response to him was after I said, what are you talking about? And he explained it to me. I said, well, my goal is to be stronger than I was before this happened. And he and his assistant they just turned white. Like, I can't even believe this guy doesn't understand what we're looking at here. But that was my attitude. And that's still my attitude. And that is not to try to be unreasonable, because I know that there are limitations and constraints that I have to work within. And I know that there's a lot of uncertainty here. But my attitude all along was, I'm going to get better. And I think that's important you may not get all the way there that you'd like to. And I don't know what's going to happen with me, but I sure am glad that was the attitude I took.
Well, and it makes sense that would be an attitude that you would have, or that would be an attitude that would be important to have, because what's the option? What's the other option?
Yeah, the other option is to fold up.
Yeah.
And then the folks at the physical therapy center where I go, they have complimented me at various points. And I've said basically what you said. Well, what other choice do I have? And they just shake their heads. And so you'd be surprised at the number of people that just don't even want to try. They just want to take painkillers and they just don't want to try.
Yeah.
And for me, that was just not an option. And so that was part of it. And then the other thing, as I said, my first experience with coming into intimate relationship with my own mortality was after I ruptured my appendix. And I went into a very deep depression for about a year after that, and was really asking myself, why am I here? What am I doing here? And I really came out of that with some pretty deep values clarification about what it is that I considered to be important in my life, what I had not completed, that I had started, and what my priorities were. And it turned out to be a really productive experience for me, because it put that, as you said, that was the first time I realized that, yeah, this candle has a finite length that's burning, and I don't know how long it is, but I know that at the moment that I pass, there are some things in my life that I have not finished up, and I would be very, very upset and unhappy if I didn't at least make the effort.
So that was a wake-up call, but at the same time, did it go away?
No, it didn't, actually.
It never did.
That never did. But as with so many things, I think that there are different levels to this experience. And so the ruptured appendix and the couple of years that followed it were level one. And that did transform my life. It truly did. And that's one of the reasons I got back into, after, as I said, 17 years of feeling like I failed at trying to do this exploration of men's experience and issues and so forth. That is one of the things that came out of it. Was I realized I've got 1,000 books in my closet that are just sitting there, and what's going to happen to them? And I need to do something about this. And so, yes, it did stay with me, Dan. I've always been different ever since then.
Wow.
But then now I've hit another level, which is not the sudden lightning strike, I almost died, but the degeneration and that sort of degradation of function. It was another lightning strike, because it came out of nowhere and it was very severe all of a sudden.
Right.
But it's a
lightning strike that keeps charging.
Right.
Keeps hitting.
Yes, potentially. Yes.
Yeah.
So it has a different character. Like as I said before, the ruptured appendix is great if you survive. They take it out and you don't have to think about that anymore. That's done. This is a different kind of animal that I'm dealing with now. So yeah, this is the second big transformative experience that I've had around mortality right now, and I'm still in it. I don't fully know what the result of it's going to be. I feel like the ruptured appendix 15 or 14 years ago, I understand that one because enough time has gone by and I can see the whole thing kind of encapsulated. This one, I'm still in it. But that was one of the things that I told myself and I told other people when my back was broken and I didn't know what was going to happen. One of the things that got me through it was that my life experience with other catastrophic situations had shown me there's something in this for me. There's opportunity here. There's opportunity for me to grow and heal. There's opportunity for me to get bigger as a person.
There always is. Every life experience has that opportunity, but being willing to see it and being able to say that and move toward that is a completely different thing. And being able to do it without having to be brought to your knees by misery is also, I think, very challenging. So I commend you on your ability to see this as an opportunity. And I'm sure there's been a grieving process and continues to be, and I know there's been pain and I know there's been fear, but your overall attitude of it being one that says, I know there's learning here and growth here that's possible for me, and I'm going to lean into this as deeply as I can. That's what I hear you saying, and I commend you for that.
And that's where I think if we want to talk about characteristics that are associated with masculinity or with men, self-reliance is a big one, I think. I think another one is, I don't know, I guess there was almost an aspect of, I don't think of myself as a competitive person, but there was certainly an aspect in me of a sense of, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to beat this is the right way to put it. But there's a certain resiliency there that I have at my disposal through the experience that formed my masculinity that I was able to draw on. And I'm really glad that I had that. And I'm really thankful that it's there and that I can access it. I had a lot of times, especially I was in so much pain and I could barely move. And I was here by myself most of the time. There was a lot of despondency there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's always, and I think this is kind of a side topic, when you talk about an adult who has survived an abusive, neglectful family system. You don't survive unless there's a place in you that gets pushed far enough against the wall and says, that's far enough, and turns around and says, I'm going to push back now.
Yeah.
And I believe that was part of what I accessed as well. Even on the worst days, there's a part of me that is not willing to give up the game, you know?
There's a great quote from Albert Camus that I absolutely love that says, it was in the midst of winter that I learned that there was inside of me an invincible summer.
Yes, that's a great quote.
Yeah, I love that. So what's the takeaway that you're looking for our listeners to get from this conversation? What is it that you're wanting people to hear?
I think that one of the things that I've begun to coalesce around in myself based on this experience is that idea that I can handle the things that happen to me, because that's not something that I was really taught as a child. And it's something that's taken me a long time as an adult to realize that I do have the inner resources. And obviously you need help from the outside. And depending upon your social situation, you might get everything you could ever want, and you might have to get by on what you can get, which is what I had to do. But I think it's important to have that knowledge and be able to reflect back on other experiences you've had that were difficult and realize when you're in the middle of something like this, that you do have the capability and the resources, and you do have the inner resourcefulness and the toughness and the character to face something like this and do something with it, as opposed to feeling, as we started this discussion, like you're just a victim and you're powerless and get hooked into the unfairness of it, because it's unfair as hell. This shouldn't be happening to me. I have no doubt. I mean, from within my limited perspective.
Right. It's as unfair as it is unfair that anybody else experiences anything else that shouldn't be what we think it should.
But I do think that idea and that philosophy, I guess, that I just shared with you, that there is something to be gained here, even though it doesn't seem that way. And I actually I have more stuff going on now. I had some kidney stones in my left kidney that were detected last May, and I finally had the procedure at the end of November, the sound wave procedure, to break them up so you can pass them. Well, I broke them up and they got about halfway and then they stuck, and I was having the full-on kidney stone experience, which is as awful as everybody says it is.
Yeah.
And so then I had to have the procedure right before Christmas with the scope and the laser, and they actually take them out and everything. And December was just a total train wreck for me. And I remember telling one of my friends, regardless of how bad this is, it seems, and how bad it is, I know from past experience that there is some value in this for me if I can just stick it out and get through it and find out what it is. And she got really mad and said, no, it's just not fair. And I totally understand that reaction, but I also know that is not a productive place if you actually want to get through anything.
But it is an important place. It's an important place to allow, but not to get stuck in.
Absolutely. And you have to allow it in balance with other things, other ways of looking at it. And I think I just came across this quote the other day, and I'm going to mangle it now, but there's a quote from Carl Jung along the lines that you can't make progress unless you can accept where you are. And so part of accepting where you are is not just the diagnosis, but it's the fear, it's the anxiety, it's the anger, it's the resentment, it's the grief, all that stuff. That all has to be part of it, but there's got to be a captain of the ship in there somewhere that says, yeah, okay, I got it. That's good. That is definitely going on. Now, where do we have to go today?
So if we're thinking about mortality and our mortality, which is true, nobody gets out of here alive. So that's the number one truth. We don't know when it's coming for the most part. That's the second truth. And we have no idea what it's going to look like or what happens after. So we have all that. Do you think it's possible for people who don't have something along the lines that you have had to really experience or have a sense of their mortality? Are we that distant from it? I mean, so necessarily distant from it, I think, because it is so existentially raw in many ways. That
it is, yeah, and I don't know how you can have a practical understanding of it. I think people that, for example, if someone has a parent or a spouse that's had, for example, a long-term illness, and they've watched them degrade and they've cared for them, I think you can get and I don't know this firsthand, I'm just saying observationally, I think you can get a pretty good sense of it from that. But barring that sort of thing, I don't know that I just don't know, Dan. I think until it becomes personal, it really is something that is more of a concept than a reality.
Yeah, well, that makes complete sense.
Yeah,
I mean, even as I'm talking to you, because I do think about it, and I do have my fears around cancer, and I have I've got some friends, they've just had prostate cancer, they've had colon cancer, the different cancers that are coming up. And I get my fears around that. I get my fears around not really even a fear, but more just a kind of question of like, what happens after this? And even almost kind of living into some of the awe of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the fact that we're having this conversation is really pretty incredible, in and of itself.
Yeah.
That we're two human beings alive, breathing, having a conversation about our own mortality is, it's a pretty powerful reality or phenomenon. And I don't know. I was hoping with this that we would be able to impress upon people the power of mortality, but I just don't know that that's possible. I don't know. The takeaway for people from this, I mean, and we always have our practical and tactical. And so, I'd love to hear from you, what are the three kind of key items that somebody can take away from this conversation? But I think part of it is that mantra that you seem to have, that is, I know that as I get through this or as I walk through this, there is something that I can learn from it.
Yes. And also the other thing that comes to mind as you said that, and I don't know if this is going to turn into a list of three things or not, but I have met some fantastic people as a result of having this experience that I never would have met otherwise. People in medical facilities, the physical therapists that have helped me, people that and this happened with the ruptured appendix too. There were friends that I thought I could count on that just literally said, I can't deal with this, and just went away.
Yeah.
And that was hard. But there were other people who just said, yeah, people that I thought were sort of on the periphery of my life, people that I hadn't seen in a couple of years. And when I was reaching out and I was casting that net as wide as I could, these people would show up. And one of the things it brought up for me is I was brought up in a environment of, how can I put this, scarcity when it comes to assistance.
Yeah.
If somebody did something for you, everything had to be balanced all the time. Or in my case, I learned I better stay ahead, because if I get behind with somebody in this family system, then they're going to use that against me. Well, look what I did for you, that kind of stuff. And so I was genuinely, and still am, shocked in a positive way that there are people that I know that will just step in and, yeah, I'll do your laundry for every week for 2 months. I don't mind. And it was really a heart-opening experience for me. So I guess that's one of the other things I would say is that when you get in a bad situation, the people that you think might be there for you, some of them might not be, but other people will emerge. And some of the people that I've met through just going through the medical process, some of the nurses and caregivers, and I'm so happy that I met them. And what other way would I ever met these people?
Mm-hmm.
So there are all kinds of side blessings and side benefits if you're open to it, even if you go through a situation that you think is the worst thing that could ever happen to you.
All right. So, Rick, we're at that point where it is our practical and tactical, the 3 takeaways that we give to our listeners that may be resonating with this topic in different ways. And so what would be the 3 key takeaways from this conversation that you would like our listeners to have?
Well, Dan, these are the things that come to mind for me. First of all, I would reiterate what we said earlier, that regardless of the nature and the severity of the situation that you're in, I think it's helpful and it's productive, and it's really true that there is some opportunity there, which may not be apparent to you while you're in the middle of it, but I think it's helpful to hold that idea that there's some opportunity here to gain some benefit from this, to move forward in your healing, to have a transformational experience that puts you in a different place in your life, that actually moves you forward in some way that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. And I think even though it can be hard to hold on to that at various moments of despair and stress and everything else, I do have found in my experience, I have found that is valid and it's important, and I think it's extremely helpful. The second thing I would recommend for everybody is that regardless of your situation, you do the best you can, and this is what I do now, to realize that every day is perfect in its own way, and that every day is your opportunity to enjoy your life and appreciate your health and make use of whatever functionality that you have. Even if it's not what you had before, there's still a lot of opportunity to enjoy life and enjoy the beauty in the world. And I don't know, none of us knows how many days we're going to have, and I think it's important to the best of your ability to hold that attitude every day, because there are great things that you can enjoy every day, and those things will really sustain you.
And it's like, I've often heard men talk about this, just this idea of a gratitude practice, and a gratitude practice, for those things which we're not normally grateful. I have 2 eyes and I can see, 2 ears and I can hear. I have 2 arms that I can use just fine. I have 2 feet and legs that I can use just fine. I have a fully functioning digestive system. I mean, to take note of those things that we take for granted and to appreciate them, and to take the time to consciously appreciate them, can make such a difference, because of when you find yourself, you don't appreciate them until you don't have access to them, unless you do a practice like that.
Yeah, and for me, it's important to do it in the moment. So when I get out and walk, and I walk a mile, I try to remind myself, don't take this for granted, because there was a time when I didn't know if I'd ever be able to do this again. So even the most mundane walk, or I might walk, it's easy when it's spring and the flowers are there. It's like, yeah, I appreciate the flowers. In the winter, when it's cold and I'm out there walking, it's like, oh, it's cold, this sucks. Like, no, this is great. This is great that I'm able to do this.
Yeah.
And the third thing I would say is, obviously, I would encourage everybody to do the best you can to take care of your health to the best of your ability and the best of your understanding, but also understand that you may get surprised by something that seems unfair or unwarranted or unexpected, that you might feel like, wow, I did everything I'm supposed to, and still I've got this thing that shouldn't happen. And to me, that's not a reason to not take care of yourself. That's everything that's happened to me has given me more incentive to take the best care of myself that I can, because I want to be able to be as functional, as productive, as engaged in my life as I can be, with whatever constraints there are. Hopefully I will continue to improve and I won't find myself back in that place again. But that circles back around to item 2, which is that I want to make the most of every day and appreciate everything that I can, And sometimes that means you have to just pause, or you have to just stop and breathe and look at things, because things are so transient, Dan. I mean, I guess that's the thing. I really get it now. And I still wake up in the morning sometimes just scared to death, because I feel like, what's going to happen to me? Terrified to go to the doctor now, because it's like, what are they going to say now? Yeah. So there is an aspect of it that requires some management and some self-discipline. And I guess I'll add a fourth thing, which is that, to whatever extent you can develop a loving self-discipline in your life that helps you care for yourself, and again gives you that confidence that you can cope with things, that you'll find a way through, that you can handle it. I think it's a tremendous asset regardless of what's going on in your life.
So a loving self-discipline, like meditation, or like meditation and prayer, or
just getting out of bed in the morning rather than laying there and feeling bad.
Okay. All right. Well, Rick, I knew that when you pitched this topic, I knew that it was going to be a different conversation than we have had in over 100 episodes of The Man Rules, and it definitely proved to be that. I want to thank you for always taking on the challenging topics, and this is one that I look forward to being able to discuss more in different ways. So, Rick, I just really want to thank you for coming on, for bringing this topic with your vulnerability, with your openness and your honesty. And I know you do that in your work as well. And so what's a way for people who want to learn more about you and get in touch with you? How do they do that?
Well, I have a couple of websites out there. I have my legacy website, which is rickbelden.com. And that's the archive of all of my written work, links to podcasts, things like that. That's the full archive. I also, one of the benefits of going through this experience the last 2.5 years is had the time to develop a coaching practice. And my website for that is rickbeldencoaching.com. And so if you visit that website, that'll give you an overview of the kind of work that I'm doing with people. You can schedule a free 30-minute discovery session with me if you'd like to check out the process and learn about how I work, and give me the opportunity to learn about you and how I might help you.
Awesome. Well, Rick, thank you again for coming on the Man Rules podcast. And I want to thank all of our listeners for another great episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Please go to Facebook at the Dan Griffin MA page, or you could go to manrules.com and you can see the podcast page there for this episode and comment there. But thanks, everybody. And remember, as you go through your week, as you go through your day, remember what Rick is saying. Remember just how incredibly precious life is. And don't worry about doing it perfectly. Just worry about doing it consciously. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Man Rules podcast, where we don't let the rules rule us. If you have ideas for guests, topics, or even want to be a guest, send us an email at ideas@themanrules.com, and check out our website and everything we're up to at themanrules.com, because the only question we have to ask is what kind of man you want to be, and what's keeping you from being that man.